the first question I have is, Andy, you said he's one of the best investors you've ever worked with, and then he took you under his wing and told you what to do. So what did he tell you what to do?
So I've been asked that question a million times because we had this rocket ship success. And in that group, in the 7-figure group, my partner and I were kind of like the guy who broke the 4-minute mile. Like once we got to $1 million, since then, there's been dozens and dozens and dozens of people who have gotten to $1 million, right?
And when you
So
say a million, you mean a million in revenue or
gross profits.
gross
Yeah,
profits? Okay.
like so. In other words, if I wholesale a house and I make $10,000, that $10,000 goes into what I'm talking about.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because the price of the house is irrelevant. When you're
Yeah.
wholesaling, it's irrelevant, right? It doesn't matter. But I get asked this question all the time, and that's exactly why I wrote my book, Level Jumping, that just came out, because I get that question all the time. So to answer your question a little more directly, what did he tell me? Well, I can tell you what he didn't tell me, or what he didn't give me necessarily, was a bunch of tools and websites and apps, because honestly, that doesn't build real estate companies. That doesn't build any company. They're tools and they help, but apps and software kind of come and go. But what he taught me was timeless, and it goes across all industries, really. And it was a lot about hiring, who he hired, when he hired, how did he compensate them when he was a small company. One of the biggest mistakes or misconceptions I had 6-7 years ago was, I'm not big enough to hire. My company isn't big enough to actually have employees. But then I knew the only way I could get big enough to be able to have employees was to hire people to help me get a little bigger, because my bandwidth is, like everybody's, is limited. Doesn't mean you can't get a ton done. You can, but you're still limited by what you can do, and you're limited by what you're good at and what you're not good at. So I was being held back by the time I had available to me and by some of my shortcomings. And again, I'm a guy I'm okay with looking objectively at what I do and saying, I'm not the best at this. I'm pretty good at this, but I'm not great at that. And I know one thing I found out I'm not great at, and this is another thing Andy helped me with, just to keep answering your question, was I'm a big fan of personality assessments now, like the Colby or the DISC, or there's another one called Culture Index, a little bit more sophisticated. It's not an end-all be-all. It's not the only thing you use when you're hiring, but I absolutely use them. And I've taken enough of those tests to know that what I need help with and what I'm not great at is details. I'm not detail-oriented. If you give me something and I have to be very detailed about the work, plan on there being mistakes, because I will screw it up. So I had to bring someone into my company. First person I ever hired, I called him, the name of the position is transaction coordinator. And that person is supposed to take the contract from the seller, the contract from the buyer, get it to title, work with title to get all the details taken care of, right? And get us to the closing table. Well, I'm horrible at it, and I procrastinate about it because I don't like doing it. So I brought someone in to help me with that, changed everything. Things are running smoother. Next thing, I hate answering the calls. I hate answering marketing calls that come in. I just don't like it. I mean, I love helping people, but I'm not great on the phone. And so I hired someone to answer the phones. It happened to be the same guy that I brought in to do sales for me. Now, I was doing sales at the time, and because it's my company, I was passable. I was competent. I wasn't great, but I was okay. When I brought a real salesperson on my team, that was night and day difference. Like seeing a real salesperson in action is like, whoa, it blows your mind when you've been sort of limping along trying to get it done. So it went from me getting, I get 50 leads and get a deal, maybe 2 out of it. Now we're getting 50 leads and getting 4 or 5 deals out of it. Like that's significant, So there's a lot of money that you're leaving on the table when you're allowing yourself to continue to do something in your company that you're not great at. And usually when people ask me, who do I hire first? How do I know who to hire? I say, look at your company. Where are the bottlenecks? And what are you really not good at? And if you can't be honest with what you're not good at, what do you not like? Because most people will tell you what they don't like. And if you don't like it, chances are you're not good at it. And where those bottlenecks are, and a lot of times it's the same location in your company. The bottlenecks are the things that you're not good at and you don't like. So that's usually the first hire. Now, maybe if somebody is really detailed, they wouldn't need that detailed person. Or if you're a fantastic salesperson, maybe sales isn't the first thing you hire. The last thing I hired out was dispositions. Now, if you don't know what dispositions mean, if you're listening to this, in my company, what it means is I get a contract from a seller. I'm a wholesaler. I get a contract from a seller. I take that contract and I market it out to a list of buyers. And my buyers are typically landlords and house flippers. Well, the guy who is in charge of marketing that contract out to my buyers list is called dispositions. I'm good at that. Now, it's a sales position technically, but it's different. sales, when you're going into the home and talking to sellers, that's more of a traditional sales role where, you're mirroring, you're pacing, you're listening, you're trying to find the pain point, you work with them in a sales capacity. Dispositions is way more like just a pure negotiation. You don't have to necessarily convince that person of the benefits of owning a rental. They know it. They've got 10 of them. They want 12, right? So you're in a negotiation the minute you start talking to them. I'm good at that. I can negotiate. The sales part, not as good at. So I gave up dispositions last, but now I have a dispo guy in there that I don't think I could add any value. He's doing as good a job as I could do or better. So that's really the goal when you start bringing people on your team. Find people that can kind of substitute for where you're not great and bring them on part-time at first. The guy that I hired for sales, by the way, he was a full-time pharmaceutical salesman. He was killing it. They were giving him awards, sending him on vacations. He was the number one sales guy in the region. But he was killing it. He had time during his day to go on appointments for me. So he did that. I only paid him commission. So why can't you do that? If you're listening, why can't you do that? It didn't cost me anything else. I got a deal, right? And then it was just a little percentage of what I was making.
Hey, thanks for joining for this segment of the interview with Mike Simmons. If you want to check out the full interview on the podcast, go to the Living Off Rentals podcast on any podcast player. You can also join us in the Living Off Rentals Facebook group. It's an awesome community. You can ask your questions or start a conversation. I hope to see you there, but if not, I will see you in the next video.